The morning of September 8, 2022, changed everything for Sergeant James Mitchell. He had been a Royal Guard for 12 years, standing tall and proud in his red uniform and black bearskin hat. His job was simple but sacred: protect the royal family and follow every rule without question. No talking, no moving, no emotions. Just stand perfectly still like a statue. James woke up that Thursday knowing something was different. The phone call started early. Senior officers rushed through the barracks with worried faces. Then came the announcement that shook the entire nation. Queen Elizabeth II had passed away peacefully at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. The Queen was gone. The woman who had ruled for 70 years, who had been like a grandmother to the entire country, was no longer with them. James felt his heart sink as the news spread through the guards. Many of them had served her personally. They had seen her smile, heard her gentle voice, watched her care for everyone around her. Within hours, everything became a whirlwind of preparation. The funeral would be the biggest event in British history. Kings, queens, presidents, and prime ministers from around the world would attend. 2 billion people would watch on television. Every detail had to be perfect. Every guard had to be flawless. James received his assignment 3 days before the funeral. He would stand guard outside Westminster Abbey during the service. His position was crucial. Millions of people would see him on live television. The orders were crystal clear: stand perfectly still, look straight ahead, show no emotion, and never break protocol under any circumstances. The training intensified immediately. Officers reminded all guards about the rules over and over again. No fidgeting, no coughing, no wiping away sweat, and absolutely no personal reactions. They were representing the crown, the military, and the entire nation. Any mistake would be seen by the whole world. But James carried a secret that made this assignment incredibly personal. 23 years ago, when he was just 8 years old, something extraordinary had happened to him. His little sister Emma had been born with a serious heart condition. The doctors said she might not survive her first birthday. His family was devastated and didn't know where to turn for help. Through a charity organization, James's mother had written a letter to Buckingham Palace, desperately asking for prayers for Emma. She never expected a response. Royal families receive thousands of letters every day. Why would they notice one letter from an ordinary family in Manchester? 2 weeks later, something incredible happened. A black car pulled up outside their small house. A royal aide stepped out carrying flowers and a personal note from Queen Elizabeth II herself. The Queen had read about Emma and wanted the family to know she was thinking of them. She included a small teddy bear for Emma and promised to keep her in her prayers. But the Queen didn't stop there. She arranged for Emma to receive treatment from the best heart specialists in London. She personally followed Emma's progress and sent cards on her birthdays. When Emma had her successful surgery at age 3, the Queen sent congratulations. When Emma started school, graduated, and eventually became a nurse herself, the Queen remembered and celebrated each milestone. Emma was now 31 years old, healthy and strong, working as a pediatric nurse helping other sick children. She often said the Queen had saved her life, not just medically but spiritually. The royal attention had given their entire family hope during the darkest time. James had never told anyone in the military about this connection. It felt too personal, too precious to share. But every day he served as a royal guard, he thought about what the Queen had done for his family. She had shown kindness to strangers when she didn't have to. She had used her power to help a dying child when no one was watching or expecting anything in return. Now, as James prepared for the funeral, the weight of this memory pressed heavily on his heart. This wasn't just another ceremonial duty. This was his chance to honor the woman who had literally saved his sister's life. The woman who had taught him that true royalty meant serving others with compassion and grace. The night before the funeral, James called Emma. Her voice was shaky with emotion as they talked about the Queen's death. Emma was heartbroken. She had planned to write another letter to thank the Queen one more time, but now it was too late. James promised his sister that he would find a way to honor the Queen's memory during the funeral. As James polished his uniform and prepared his equipment, he made a quiet decision. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he would carry the love and gratitude of his entire family as he stood guard. The rules were important, but sometimes the heart knows what's more important than rules. He looked at himself in the mirror, adjusting his red tunic one final time. In just a few hours he would take his position outside Westminster Abbey, The eyes of the world would be watching. Protocol demanded perfection. But James knew that the Queen herself had taught him something more valuable than perfect protocol. She had taught him about perfect love. The morning of September 19th arrived with gray clouds hanging over London like a heavy blanket of sorrow. James woke up at 4:30 a.m., his stomach churning with nervous energy. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day Britain would say goodbye to their beloved Queen forever. The streets of London were already filled with people, even in the early morning darkness. Thousands had camped overnight, hoping to catch a glimpse of the funeral procession. Many were crying, holding flowers, wearing black clothes, and carrying pictures of the Queen. The entire city felt like it was wrapped in grief. James arrived at the barracks where dozens of other guards were preparing in silence. The usual morning chatter was replaced by quiet concentration. Everyone understood the magnitude of what was about to happen. This funeral would be watched by more people than any event in television history. Every guard knew that one small mistake could ruin the dignity of the entire ceremony. Colonel Harrison, their commanding officer, gave the final briefing. His voice was stern and serious as he reminded them of their duties. "Gentlemen, today the eyes of the world are upon us. We represent Her Majesty's memory, the British military, and our nation's respect for our fallen Queen. Stand tall, remain motionless, and show no emotion. This is not about your personal feelings. This is about duty, honor, and protocol." James nodded along with the others, but inside his heart was racing. How could he not show emotion? How could anyone stand unmoved while saying goodbye to a woman who had dedicated her entire life to serving others, especially when that woman had personally touched his family's life in such a profound way? The guards marched in, formation through the quiet London streets, toward Westminster Abbey. The ancient church had witnessed royal weddings, coronations, and funerals for nearly 1,000 years. Today it would host its most important ceremony ever. The building was decorated with white flowers and filled with 2,000 of the most important people in the world. James took his assigned position on the stone steps outside the Abbey's main entrance. From here, he could see the street where the Queen's coffin would arrive, carried on a gun carriage pulled by naval officers. Behind him, inside the Abbey, world leaders were taking their seats. President Biden, President Macron, the Emperor of Japan, and dozens of kings and queens filled the ancient pews. The morning air was crisp and cold. James could see his breath forming small clouds in front of his face. Around him, other guards stood like perfect statues, their red uniforms bright against the gray stone of the Abbey. Thousands of people lined the streets, many with tears already streaming down their faces. At exactly 10:35 a.m., the procession began. James heard the sound first, the slow rhythmic beating of drums echoing through the London streets. Then came the clip-clop of horses' hooves on the pavement. The Royal Navy sailors appeared first, their white uniforms pristine as they pulled the gun carriage with precise, measured steps. On top of the carriage sat the Queen's coffin draped in the royal standard flag. The imperial state crown, the golden orb, and the ceremonial scepter sat on top of the flag, catching the morning light. These were the same symbols of power that the Queen had carried for 70 years, now making their final journey with her. Behind the coffin walked King Charles III, his face etched with grief but maintaining royal composure. Prince William and Prince Harry walked side by side, their differences set aside for this moment of shared sorrow. Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and other members of the royal family followed, all dressed in black, all struggling to contain their emotions. As the procession drew closer to James's position, he could see the faces of the royal family more clearly. These weren't just symbols of monarchy. They were a family saying goodbye to their mother and grandmother. King Charles looked older than his years, the weight of losing his mother and gaining the throne visible in his tired eyes. The crowd fell completely silent as the coffin approached the Abbey steps. James had never experienced such profound quiet from so many people. Even the crying stopped for a moment as everyone held their breath. The only sounds were the drums, the horses, and the gentle scraping of the carriage wheels on the ancient stones. Then James saw something that nearly broke his composure. As the coffin passed directly in front of him, he noticed a small wreath of flowers on top, separate from the formal arrangements. It was made of simple garden flowers, the kind an ordinary person might pick from their backyard. Later, he would learn that King Charles had placed it there personally, choosing flowers from the Queen's beloved gardens at Balmoral Castle. The sight of those simple flowers hit James like a punch to the chest. Here was the most powerful woman in the world, surrounded by golden crowns and priceless jewels. But what her son chose to honor her with were the humble flowers she had grown with her own hands. It reminded James of the Queen's letter to his family all those years ago. Royal power used for simple, personal kindness. The naval officers lifted the coffin with military precision and began carrying it up the Abbey steps. Each step was slow and deliberate, choreographed to perfection. James watched as the coffin passed just a few feet from where he stood. Inside that wooden box was the woman who had ruled longer than anyone in British history, who had met with 14 different prime ministers, who had seen the world change completely during her reign. But to James, inside that coffin was also the woman who had cared enough to help a dying little girl she had never met. The woman who had taught him that true leadership meant serving others, especially those who couldn't help themselves. As the Queen's coffin disappeared through the great doors of Westminster Abbey, James felt something shift inside his chest. The massive wooden doors closed with a deep, echoing sound that seemed to represent the end of an era. Inside the Abbey, the funeral service was beginning. Outside, James and the other guards continued their silent vigil. The ceremony inside was being broadcast to every corner of the world. James could hear faint sounds of hymns and prayers drifting through the ancient stone walls. He knew that inside, Archbishop Justin Welby was delivering the funeral service, speaking about the Queen's life of duty and service. World leaders sat in wooden pews that had witnessed centuries of British history. Standing perfectly still on the Abbey steps, James found his mind wandering back to his childhood. He remembered the day Emma came home from the hospital after her heart surgery. She was so small and fragile, with a long scar across her tiny chest. The doctors said the operation had been successful, but she would need years of careful monitoring and treatment. Their mother had framed the Queen's letter and hung it in Emma's bedroom. As Emma grew up, she would read that letter whenever she felt scared about her heart condition. The Queen had written that she believed Emma was a fighter and would grow up to help other people. Those words became Emma's inspiration to become a nurse. James remembered Emma's excitement when she graduated from nursing school. She had worn a small pin with the Queen's portrait on her uniform during the graduation ceremony. "The Queen believed in me before I believed in myself," Emma had said that day. "Now I want to help other children the way she helped me." The sound of sobbing from the crowd brought James back to the present moment. Around him, thousands of people were openly weeping. Many held pictures of the Queen, flowers or small British flags. Some had traveled from across the country just to be here for these final moments. Others had come from around the world, wanting to pay their respects to a leader they had admired from afar. James noticed an elderly woman in the front row of spectators, just a few yards from where he stood. She was wearing a black coat and holding a handkerchief to her eyes. Her gray hair was carefully styled, and she wore a small brooch with the Queen's picture on it. She looked to be about the same age as the Queen would have been. The woman was crying silently, but her tears were falling steadily down her wrinkled cheeks. James could see her lips moving slightly, as if she was saying a prayer or talking to the Queen one last time. In her free hand, she clutched a single white rose. Suddenly, the woman's legs seemed to give out beneath her. She swayed dangerously, and James could see she was about to collapse. The people around her were focused on the Abbey doors and didn't notice her distress. If she fell, she could seriously hurt herself on the stone steps. Every fiber of James's training screamed at him to remain motionless. Royal guards never moved during ceremonies. They never responded to anything happening around them. They were supposed to be like statues, completely unaware of everything except their duty to stand guard. Breaking this rule was one of the most serious offenses a guard could commit. But James couldn't watch an elderly woman fall and possibly get seriously injured. Without thinking, he took a small step forward and gently steadied her with his hand. It was just a brief touch, barely noticeable to most people, but enough to help her regain her balance. "Thank you, dear," the woman whispered so quietly that only James could hear her. She would have done the same thing. James immediately stepped back into position, hoping his brief movement hadn't been noticed by his commanding officers. His heart was pounding, but he felt no regret. He knew he had done the right thing, even if it meant breaking protocol. Inside the abbey, the service was reaching its most emotional moments. James could hear the sound of "God Save the King" being sung by the congregation. It was the first time in 70 years that those words had been sung for a king instead of a queen. The weight of change, of history turning a page, was almost overwhelming. As the hymn ended, James heard something that made his breath catch in his throat. The sound of bagpipes began to echo from inside the abbey. The lone piper was playing "The Last Post," a hauntingly beautiful melody traditionally played at military funerals. The music seemed to float through the stone walls and drift across the silent crowd like a final goodbye. The elderly woman James had helped was still crying, but now she was smiling through her tears. She looked up at him with gratitude in her eyes. "My husband was a guardsman too," she whispered. "He would have been proud of you today." James felt his own eyes beginning to fill with tears. The combination of the bagpipe music, the woman's words, and the overwhelming emotion of the moment was becoming too much to bear. He tried to blink away the tears to maintain his military composure, but they kept coming. He thought about Emma, probably watching the funeral on television at the hospital where she worked. He thought about all the children she had helped over, the years inspired by the Queen's example of service to others. He thought about the countless acts of kindness the Queen had performed throughout her long life, many of which the public would never know about. The bagpipe music grew louder, more mournful, more beautiful. James realized that this was more than just a funeral. It was the end of an era of stability and grace that many people had never known life without. The Queen had been like a steady lighthouse in a world of constant change, always there, always reliable, always caring. As the music reached its climax, James made a decision that would change everything. He could no longer pretend to be an emotionless statue. His heart was too full, his gratitude too deep, his sorrow too real. The Queen had taught him that humanity was more important than protocol, that love was more powerful than rules. The moment arrived like a wave that James couldn't stop. As the haunting bagpipe melody of "The Last Post" reached its most emotional crescendo, something deep inside his chest finally broke open. 23 years of gratitude, a lifetime of respect, and an overwhelming love for the woman who had saved his sister's life came flooding out all at once. James felt the first tear slide down his cheek, warm against the cold morning air. Then another, then more, until he could no longer hold them back. Standing there in his perfect red uniform, surrounded by thousands of people and millions watching on television around the world, Sergeant James Mitchell began to cry. At first, he tried to stop the tears by sheer force of will. He had been trained for 12 years to show no emotion, to be a perfect representation of military discipline. But the more he tried to control his feelings, the stronger they became. The tears weren't just for the Queen's death. They were for everything she had represented, everything she had given to the world, and everything she had personally given to his family. The elderly woman he had helped noticed his tears first. She looked up at his face with understanding and compassion. Instead of being shocked that a royal guard was crying, she seemed to find comfort in it. Here was someone who understood her grief, someone who felt the same profound loss that she was experiencing. Other people in the crowd began to notice as well. A young mother holding her small daughter pointed quietly at James. The little girl, maybe 5 years old, tugged at her mother's coat and whispered, "Mummy, why is the soldier sad?" "Because he loved the Queen too, sweetheart," the mother whispered back, her own voice thick with emotion. "Just like we do." The sight of James crying seemed to give permission to others who had been trying to hold back their own emotions. A teenage boy standing nearby, who had been trying to look tough and unaffected, suddenly began sobbing openly. A businessman in an expensive suit put his face in his hands and wept. An elderly man who had probably fought in wars and seen terrible things let tears stream down his weathered face. James could feel the eyes of his fellow guards on him. He knew they were probably shocked and horrified by his display of emotion. Breaking protocol during such an important ceremony was unthinkable. He would certainly face serious consequences when this was over. His career might be finished. But in that moment, none of that mattered. The bagpipe music continued to fill the air, each note seeming to pull more emotion from everyone listening. James thought about the Queen's final journey, how she had given everything to serve her people for 70 years. She had sacrificed her personal life, her privacy, and her own desires to fulfill her duty to the crown and to the nation. But more than that, she had used her position to help individual people like his sister Emma. She had shown that true power meant using your influence to make life better for others, especially those who had no voice or power of their own. She had demonstrated that royalty wasn't about being above other people. It was about serving them with grace and humility. As James stood there crying, he felt a strange sense of peace washing over him. For the first time in his military career, he was being completely honest about his feelings. He wasn't hiding behind a mask of professional composure. He was showing the world exactly how much the Queen had meant to him, and to millions of other people. The crowd around him seemed to understand this instinctively. Instead of being shocked or critical, people appeared to find James's tears deeply moving. Several people pulled out their phones and began recording, not to mock or embarrass him, but to capture what felt like a genuine moment of human emotion in the middle of a very formal ceremony. A news cameraman who had been filming the crowd noticed James and quietly adjusted his camera angle to include him in the shot. The image of the crying royal guard began to appear on television screens around the world. News anchors, initially unsure how to react, soon began to speak about the emotional power of the moment. "We're seeing something extraordinary here," whispered one BBC commentator, his own voice filled with emotion. A royal guard trained to show no emotion, unable to contain his grief for the Queen. "This is perhaps the most honest moment we've witnessed today." Inside Westminster Abbey, the funeral service was reaching its conclusion. Archbishop Welby was delivering his final blessing, speaking about the Queen's faith and her belief in serving others. The world leaders in attendance were sitting in respectful silence, many of them visibly emotional as well. But outside on the Abbey steps, something equally powerful was happening. James's tears had created a ripple effect of shared grief and love. The formal barrier between the guards and the people seemed to dissolve. Everyone present was simply human beings saying goodbye to someone they had loved and respected. A small girl, maybe 7 years old, broke away from her mother's hand and approached James. She was carrying a single white flower, a daisy she had probably picked from someone's garden. Without saying a word, she gently placed the flower at James's feet and looked up at him with large, understanding eyes. "Thank you for loving her too," the little girl said in a voice so soft that only James could hear her. James looked down at the child, his vision blurred by tears, and felt his heart breaking and healing at the same time. This was what the Queen had always understood, that leadership meant connecting with people on the most basic human level. It meant sharing their joys and sorrows, their hopes and fears. The funeral service inside the Abbey was ending, and soon the Queen's coffin would emerge for its final journey to Windsor Castle. James knew that his commanding officers would soon discover what he had done. He would face questioning, possibly disciplinary action, maybe even the end of his military career. But as he looked at the faces around him, the elderly woman he had helped, the crying teenager, the little girl with the flower, and dozens of others who had found comfort in his honest display of emotion, James knew he had made the right choice. The Queen herself had taught him that sometimes love was more important than rules. The massive doors of Westminster Abbey slowly opened, and the sound of "God Save the King" echoed across the silent crowd. The funeral service was ending, and the Queen's final journey was about to begin. James wiped his eyes with the back of his gloved hand, trying to compose himself as the royal family and world leaders began to emerge from the ancient church. King Charles III appeared first, his face etched with grief but maintaining the dignity expected of a monarch. Behind him walked Prince William and Prince Harry, followed by other members of the royal family. Their faces showed the same mixture of sorrow and strength that James was feeling in his own heart. The Queen's coffin emerged once again, carried by the same naval officers who had brought it into the Abbey. The imperial state crown, orb, and scepter still rested on top of the royal standard flag, but now they seemed different somehow, more final, more symbolic of an ending rather than ongoing power. As the procession reformed outside the abbey, James noticed Colonel Harrison standing nearby, watching him with a stern expression. The commanding officer's face was unreadable, but James knew he had been observed breaking protocol. The consequences would come later, but right now the ceremony had to continue. The gun carriage was repositioned, and the Queen's coffin was carefully placed on top once again. The horses stood patiently, their breath visible in the cold air. The procession would now travel through London one final time, allowing the people to say their last goodbye before the Queen was taken to Windsor Castle for burial. As the procession began to move away from Westminster Abbey, something unexpected happened. The crowd, which had been maintaining respectful silence, began to applaud. It started slowly, with just a few people clapping, but it quickly spread through the thousands of spectators lining the streets. This wasn't the formal, polite applause of a royal event. This was something deeper and more emotional, the sound of a grateful nation expressing their love and appreciation for a woman who had devoted her entire life to serving them. The applause grew louder and more heartfelt as it spread, becoming a wave of gratitude that seemed to follow the Queen's coffin down the street. James watched the procession disappear around the corner and felt a hand touch his shoulder. He turned to see Colonel Harrison standing beside him, but instead of the angry expression James expected, his commanding officer's face showed understanding and even a hint of pride. "Sergeant Mitchell," the colonel said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." James's heart sank. This was it, the moment when his career would end because he had chosen emotion over protocol. He followed Colonel Harrison to a quiet area behind the abbey, away from the crowd and the other guards. "Sir, I can explain," James began, but Colonel Harrison held up his hand to stop him. "Sergeant, in 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything like what happened here today," the colonel said. "You broke protocol in front of the entire world. You showed emotion during one of the most important ceremonies in British history." James stood at attention, waiting for his punishment. "Yes, sir. I understand the consequences of my actions." But Colonel Harrison surprised him. "What you did today was exactly what the Queen would have wanted," he said. She always believed that showing genuine human emotion was more important than following rigid rules. "You honored her memory in the most authentic way possible." James looked up, confused. "Sir, I don't understand. I broke the most fundamental rule of being a royal guard." "No, Sergeant," Colonel Harrison replied. "You followed a higher rule, the rule of the heart. The Queen spent her entire life showing that true leadership means caring about people as individuals, not just following protocol. What you did today demonstrated that same spirit." The colonel pulled out his phone and showed James a video that had already been shared thousands of times on social media. It showed James crying as the bagpipes played, with the little girl placing the flower at his feet. The comments below the video were overwhelmingly positive. "The whole world is talking about this moment," Colonel Harrison explained. "People are saying it was the most honest and moving part of the entire funeral. You've shown them that even trained soldiers can love and grieve. You've made the Queen's memory more real and more human." James felt a wave of relief wash over him, but also confusion. "What happens now, sir? Will I face disciplinary action?" Colonel Harrison smiled, the first time James had ever seen him smile. "Quite the opposite, Sergeant. The royal family has already heard about what happened. King Charles himself wants to meet with you personally. He said that your display of genuine emotion honored his mother's memory better than perfect protocol ever could." The news was almost too much for James to process. Instead of ending his career, his moment of vulnerability had somehow elevated him. But more importantly, it had created a connection between the royal family and the people that went beyond formal ceremony. "There's something else you should know," Colonel Harrison continued. "The royal family has learned about your sister's story, about how the Queen helped your family when Emma was sick. They want to make sure that story is told as part of the Queen's legacy." James felt tears coming to his eyes again. "How did they find out about Emma?" "Good news travels fast in the royal household," the colonel replied. "They've been investigating the background of what happened today. When they discovered the personal connection between your family and the Queen, everything made sense. Your emotion wasn't just professional grief, it was personal gratitude." As they walked back toward the abbey, James saw that the crowd was beginning to disperse. Many people were still crying, still holding flowers, still processing what they had witnessed. The elderly woman he had helped was still there, waiting near where he had been standing guard. She approached James with a warm smile. "Young man, I wanted to thank you again, not just for helping me, but for showing us all that it's okay to grieve openly. My husband was a guardsman for 40 years, and he always said the hardest part of the job was pretending not to care. Today you showed the world that guards are human beings too." James shook her hand gently. "Thank you, ma'am. Your husband sounds like he was a good man." "He was," she replied, "and so are you. The Queen would have been proud of you today." 3 weeks after the Queen's funeral, James found himself standing in the same room where his life had changed forever as a child. The drawing room at Buckingham Palace looked exactly as he remembered it from pictures, with its elegant furniture, crystal chandeliers, and portraits of previous monarchs hanging on the silk-covered walls. King Charles III entered the room with a gentle smile, looking more relaxed than he had appeared during the intense days following his mother's death. He was dressed in a simple gray suit rather than formal royal attire, which immediately put James at ease. "Sergeant Mitchell," the king said, extending his hand for a warm handshake. "Thank you for coming. I've been looking forward to meeting you personally." James had practiced this moment dozens of times, rehearsing proper protocol for meeting the monarch. But King Charles seemed more interested in having a genuine conversation than following formal procedures. "Your Majesty, I want to apologize for breaking protocol during the funeral," James began. But the king immediately waved his hand dismissively. "Nonsense," King Charles replied. "What you did that day was exactly what my mother would have wanted. She always believed that genuine emotion was more valuable than perfect performance. You honored her memory beautifully." The king gestured for James to sit in one of the comfortable armchairs near a large window overlooking the palace gardens. "I've learned about your family's connection to my mother, about your sister Emma and how the Queen helped her when she was ill. I want you to know that story has brought great comfort to our family during this difficult time." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your Majesty, your mother saved my sister's life. Not just medically, but she gave our whole family hope when we had none left. Emma is now a pediatric nurse, helping other sick children because she was inspired by the Queen's kindness. That's exactly the kind of legacy my mother wanted to leave," King Charles said, his own eyes becoming moist. "She always said that the true measure of leadership was how many individual lives you could touch with compassion. Your sister's story proves that philosophy worked." The king stood up and walked to his desk, returning with a leather folder. "I have something that belongs to your family," he said, opening the folder carefully. Inside were photocopies of all the letters and cards the Queen had sent to Emma over the years. There were birthday cards, get-well wishes, congratulations for her nursing school graduation, and even a photo of the Queen holding the teddy bear she had given to baby Emma, taken before it was sent to their family. My mother kept copies of all her personal correspondence with the people she helped," King Charles explained. "She wanted to remember every individual she encountered. Your sister was very special to her." James looked through the papers with amazement. There were notes in the Queen's own handwriting, tracking Emma's progress through her childhood illnesses and celebrating her achievements. It was clear that the Queen had genuinely cared about this one little girl she had never met in person. "There's one more thing," the king said, pulling out a final document. "My mother wrote this letter to Emma just 2 weeks before she died. She never had a chance to send it." With trembling hands, James read the letter. In it, the Queen congratulated Emma on her recent promotion to head nurse in the pediatric cardiac unit at her hospital. She wrote about how proud she was that Emma had dedicated her life to helping other children with heart problems, just like she had once needed help herself. The letter ended with words that brought tears to James's eyes. "You have grown into exactly the kind of person I always knew you would become. Someone who uses her own experience with adversity to help others facing similar challenges. You are living proof that kindness creates more kindness and love creates more love. Your parents and your brother should be very proud of the woman you've become." "She knew about me too," James whispered, amazed. "Of course she did." King Charles smiled. "She followed your entire family's story. She was particularly pleased when she learned you had become a royal guard. She said it proved that her investment in your family had come full circle." The king walked to the window and looked out at the gardens where his mother had spent countless peaceful hours. "The day of the funeral, when I learned what had happened with you outside the abbey, I wasn't surprised. I knew that if any of my guards were going to show genuine emotion, it would be someone who had a personal understanding of my mother's true character. James joined the king at the window. "Your Majesty, what happens now?" "How do we carry on her legacy?" "By remembering what she taught us," King Charles replied. "That real leadership isn't about maintaining perfect composure or following every rule without question. It's about connecting with people on a human level, showing compassion when it's needed, and understanding that sometimes the heart knows better than the head." The king turned to face James directly. "I want to offer you a new position as a special liaison between the royal household and the charitable organizations my mother supported. Your job would be to help us continue her work of helping individual families in crisis, just like yours was helped all those years ago." James was speechless. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. "Your Majesty, I would be honored." "There's one condition," the king added with a slight smile. "You must promise me that you'll never be afraid to show genuine emotion when the situation calls for it. The world needs more people who aren't afraid to let their hearts lead the way." As James left Buckingham Palace that day, he called Emma immediately to share the news. She cried with joy when he told her about the Queen's final letter and the new opportunity he had been given. "James," Emma said through her tears, "the Queen is still helping our family even after she's gone. This is her way of making sure her kindness continues to spread to other people." 6 months later, James was working directly with families whose children were facing serious illnesses, connecting them with medical resources and emotional support through royal charities. Every day he thought about the Queen's lesson that true power meant using your position to help others, especially those who had no voice of their own. The video of James crying at the Queen's funeral had been watched by millions of people around the world. It became a symbol of authentic grief and genuine love that transcended formal protocol. People often wrote to him, saying that seeing a strong military man show his emotions had given them permission to grieve openly and love deeply. Emma framed the Queen's final letter and hung it in the pediatric ward where she worked. Children and their families often read it when they needed hope during their darkest moments. The Queen's words about kindness creating more kindness continued to inspire new generations, proving that her legacy of compassion would live on forever. James never regretted breaking protocol that September day. He had learned that sometimes the most important rule is to follow your heart, and that the greatest honor you can give someone you love is to show the world exactly how much they meant to you.